Hello, I'm a student of Bhikkhu Candana. This is just a reminder that he is a homeless monk, depending entirely on donations to live and share the Dhamma. If you want to help support Bhante, our teacher, please consider donating to this cause. Thank you and enjoy.
In this week's sutta, I believe it's week number 79, I chose for us one of the suttas that comes at the tail end of the Majjhima Nikāya, the middle-length discourses, where we find a series of suttas dedicated to the six senses. They're very deep suttas. They're very poignant. They're very sharp. They have this laser precision to them, where Lord Buddha, you can see how he is unwilling to sacrifice any bits of the details that could help a person to take that jump in understanding the intricacies, the nuances that are involved in the six senses, in the six sense spheres. What he would use the term salayatana, which you also see it with that term in the linkages in the formulation of the paticcasamuppada, the dependent origination links. So the name of today's sutta is Mahāsaḻāyatanika Sutta. The sutta, the Maha is the greater discourse that deals with the six sense spheres. For some reason, I think oftentimes we forget to pay necessary attention to the six senses. These are often neglected when we're talking about life, when we're talking about experiences, because it seems that the majority of the time life is based on perceptions and feelings. Specifically, when you put those two together, feelings seem to be getting the upper hand, the most clout, the front row seat, the spotlight of experience. But rarely do we stop and consider, where do feelings come from? As a result of what? Lord Buddha would use the word paccaya. Conditioned by what? Well, that's where we come to contact. But how is contact made? Salayatana. Salayatana are the six senses that we don't pay attention to. Yes, I keep repeating, and yes, you've seen it across the suttas, where Lord Buddha says, restraint, restraint, restraint. Samvara. Try to apply restraint, guardianship. Guard those six sense doors. But here we see how it's a little bit more than that. We need to understand, what is it that we are guarding against? And where does that take us when we are guarding? And what are we guarding? The six senses. Okay, what are they? Okay, let's go with Salayatana 101, basics. We have the eyes. We have the ears. We have the nose, we have the tongue, we have the body, and we have the mind. These are considered the internal sense spaces. Then you have the external, the objects of these, the things with which these get combined or have a relationship to each other, in a sense. You have the eyes, hence you need to have visible object, forms, rupa, things that are identifiable with the eyes. So that's the external sense base. Okay, and let's jump to the ears. The ears need sound. So that sound becomes the object of the ears. Nose, you have fragrances, odors. Same thing with the tongue. You have tastes, gustatory. Then you have the body. You have tactile, things that you can touch, touches. Kinesthetics, being able to touch and feel the object of the body. And then you have the mind. The mind, its resonating point is, or the object of the mind is, or are ideas. Ideas. Sometimes I like to translate them as phenomena or mental objects. Often that's how they're translated. Hindrances are notorious to be used as dhammas. In Pali, we use dhammas for that, not the Buddha's teachings, small d. So the objects of the mind, there's an interaction there. The objects of the body, tactile perceptions, there's an interaction there. The objects of the tongue, tastes, there's an interaction there. The objects of the nose, fragrances, odors, pleasant or unpleasant or neutral, doesn't make a difference. There's an interaction there. Same thing with the sounds in the ears. There's an interaction there. And then there's the eyes and visible forms. There's an interaction there. So this is, in essence, Mara. This, in essence, is life. In the, I believe it's in the Samyutta Nikāya, where it's several suttas, kind of very similar to each other, where a bhikkhu approaches Lord Buddha asking, Bhante, what is Mara? Could you tell me what is Mara? In one sutta, Lord Buddha lists the 6 senses as Mara. He says, do you have the 6 senses? He says, yes, Bhante. There you go, that's Mara. You want to get rid of Mara? Work with the 6 senses. Understand the 6 senses. Other places you will see him talking about Namarupa, mentality and materiality, name and form. It's the same thing. So, in essence, one could say that whichever link from the dependent originations you pluck out, you want to just focus on that for a while. It gives you clear-cut access to Nibbana. You don't need to know the whole linkages. You don't need to know every single aspect of the dependent originations, because even that is anicca. The teaching of Paticca Samuppada itself is conditioned, because in other suttas you see Lord Buddha doesn't even use the 12 links. He uses far less. So understanding, because each of these links have or has within it the Four Noble Truths. There's an absence of wisdom there, because each of these indicate the presence of dukkha. When you really, really probe and see, why did Lord Buddha even talk about the 6 senses as Mara? Because of their power over the mind of the Puthujjana, the common, ordinary, worldling, unlearned individual who lacks understanding and who lacks interest, curiosity to understand. So without getting too much into it already, let's just get a better understanding of, establish ourselves as to how the sutta is and where is it, etc. So it's Majjhima Nikāya 149 from the middle length discourses, Sutta 149. So this is near the tail end, because Majjhima Nikāya has 152 suttas. So this is just shy by 3 or 4 from the ending of the suttas of the Majjhima Nikāya. So it's called the Mahāsaḻāyatanika Sutta, the great or greater discourse on the 6 sense spheres. I have personally heard this. At one time, the Blessed One was living in the monastery offered by Anathapindika at Jeta's Park in the city of Savatthi. Then the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus gathered there. Bhikkhus, yes, Lord, replied the bhikkhus. And the Blessed One continued by saying, Bhikkhus, I will teach you the great discourse on the 6 sense spheres. Listen carefully and pay close attention. I will now speak. Yes, Bhante, they replied, and the Blessed One said, Bhikkhus, when you do not discern by knowing fully, as you look carefully to see what this thing called an I factually is, or the forms it sees, or I consciousness, or eye contact, and whatever kind of feelings that may arise from it, be it pleasant, painful, or neutral, which result from the contact being made by the eye, then you become triggered and provoked by the eye. The forms it sees, triggered by the forms that you're seeing, the eye consciousness, or eye contact, and whatever kind of feelings that may arise from it, be it pleasant, painful, or neutral, which result from the contact being made by the eye. So basically, you're sold. You're sold the story, the Maya, the delusion. The magician has done his trick, and you bought it. You're deceived. Now, when you allow yourself to live in such a deluded manner, where you are triggered and provoked by becoming identified with and thus tied down to these feelings, you will experience tension and tightness, feeling like you are trapped with uncertainty, as you intend to run away from that experience to a much better and more satisfying one. Then what occurs is this. The wanting in you to grab onto the 5 aggregates intensifies and builds up, leading to this cycle of agitation repeating itself again in the future. That's dukkha, by the way. As a result of this, the craving in you also grows, which is closely tied to yearning and lusting to be reborn, sometime here, sometime there in the future. Meanwhile, your physical and mental difficulties, frustrations, along with the constant anxiety and unending sorrow also increase, as they all come to add more heated agitation into every aspect of your life, thereby making you experience further bodily, emotional, and mental suffering. A person who's not smiling is an embodiment of all this. That's one simple way of seeing it. The power of what our belief in feelings and the authenticity that we give it, the unquestionability of what it is that I am feeling, according to which I will set my trajectory, which usually is like the dog chasing its tail, trying to bite its tail. What it is you're constantly going into these cycles. Here, the word I used, reborn, sometime here, sometime there. It's not necessarily just rebirth into another form later on once this body breaks down after your death, the death of this body. It's not just that, but we're constantly wanting to be reborn as far as experiences go. Okay, this doesn't work out, this didn't work out, don't worry. Don't worry. That's what tanha comes and says to you, whispers in your ears. That's craving. Don't worry, I got this. We'll go after that thing over there. Oh, you don't like that? Don't worry. Yes, I got you covered. We'll go there. There. Meanwhile, you see yourself slouched. You see you have a hunched back. You see yourself 80, 90 years old. But the tendencies have not left you. The ignorance hasn't left you. The delusion is still running the show. One set of things that we need to be aware of, and this distinguishes an arahant from a putujjana, is that every time a being has feelings, an experience, there is an arising. Think of it first. So it has 5 divisions. So 6 senses, think of them. We just talked about the eye. So think of them as having their 5 stages. Okay? There's the arising, there's the demising or the disappearance of it, meaning the feeling that arose, the good feeling, right? But because of the fact that there is anicca, impermanence, what happens is this feeling will never, ever, ever last. It will change. It will vanish. It will lose its efficacy. It will lose its luster. It will lose its color. It will die until the next one shows up. So this is what the putujjana is mostly interested in, if not only interested in, the arising of the pleasurable experience. Okay? Always. So what the putujjana, or the ignorant, dense person does is the person ignores the second aspect of all experience, conditioned experience. It only looks at the arising. It never looks at the demising or the death of that experience, which was so promising. What happened? It never asked. The person never asks, what happened to it? Now, this is very interesting for those students of the Dhamma who are probing to understand what's really going on. They say, hold on. The promise that you made, oh craving, oh tanha, the promise that this was going to last, it didn't last. So wait a minute, where are you going? Why are you chasing after another experience? Let's deal with this one first. So this is not the domain of a putujjana. A wiser person will say, hold on, there was a rising and there's the demising, there's the death of that experience. Okay, let me look at this approach that I have, that I need to constantly go after pleasurable experiences. Let me question that theorem, that idea, that approach. This is when the person is walking away from that path that keeps a person a putujjana, who can never know the Dhamma. This Dhamma is not for those who want to stay there. This Dhamma is for those who want to cut clean out of that path. And the way to do that is by seeing that the arising of that pleasurable feeling occurred, and then it died. By the way, the first one is called samudaya, which you also see it as the second noble truth, the cause or the origin of the feeling or the arising. The second one here that I mentioned, the going down or the dying of that experience, because it must follow the rule of existence, which is anicca. All conditioned things are impermanent. So going down or dying, perishing, vanishing, here is attagama. So first one is samudaya, the other one is attagama. Then the third aspect of feelings has to do with the satisfaction or the gratification that is promised. That's why you're going looking for the next feeling, and the next feeling, and the next feeling. Look at a child, and they give you the perfect example, or even a pet, a dog. You promise them to just shake the leash, and guess what? Every problem is forgotten, and they're ready to go. They're by the door waiting for you. We're no different when we're run by tanha, by craving. So the promise of satisfaction is what keeps the wheel of samsara going, in other words. So the first one was the arising, samudaya. Second one was attagama. The third one is asada, which is the satisfaction. So it has elements of greed in it, right? The promise of satisfaction, becoming gratified if I were to do that, to look over there even, or if I listen to this piece of news, or to look at that color over there. That's called asada. Now, the wiser person will not stop here. He's seeing all these things happen. But remember the second where I said it dies? Attagama, it whatever arose dies, goes down. And then there's the satisfaction promise. But even that, because it's going up, there's a satisfaction. It dies inevitably. This then is seen as a peril, as danger, as cause for terror, cause for fear in the minds and hearts of someone who is wanting to understand. This is where the beginnings of panya take place. So panya is not something that you just open the door by, just happens. No, there needs to be understanding taking place. That's why just pure practice of jhana will never give you panya, ever. Ever. That's why Lord Buddha, as Siddhartha, never attained any panya, even though he had mastered all 8 jhanas, 8 of them, fully. But he didn't have any panya. So this allows the person to probe and understand the role that the satisfaction, the promise of satisfaction, and then you see how the misery that follows the moment that it just vanished, that promise satisfaction promise is just depleted and gone. So that peril, that risk is called adinava. And then this causes the wiser person, the one practicing the Dhamma, to just, in Pali it's called nissarana, to just drop it, to just step away from things. Just step out of that cycle. Nissarana. Because you're seeing what the mind is doing, the sneaky, very sneaky, the magician's tricks you're seeing. And it has everything to do, because otherwise, oftentimes people think of craving as something out there that you need to obliterate, a thing out there, and you completely ignore our own contribution to keep it sustained. Remember, the Putujjana only will look at the arising or the satisfaction of that feeling, right? The promise of that. But the wiser person is actually looking at the Nirodha portion of it when it's dying. And as a result of that, he says, no, whatever you're promising me, oh tanha, whatever this experience, this feeling is promising me, the gratification, I'm not buying it. I'm sorry. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to step out of it. I'm going to step away from this cycle. That's called the nissarana. So I wanted to give you that clue before we, really delve into the sutta, because this is key to understanding how we can unlock the way to Nibbana through the 6 sense doors. Through the 6 sense doors. So you don't need to know all the suttas. You don't even need to know the whole sutta in question. You can just look at one aspect of the teaching within, and that could be enough to take you straight to fruition of arahanthood in this life. Dittheva dhamme. So anyhow, let's move on now to the second. There's a lot to cover, but it's such a juicy, saturated with Dhamma type of a sutta. I want to do it justice, so I'm going to try not to skip as much as I can. So let's move on. Also, because when you do discern, but please don't think of there is this repeatability of the sutta. Part of the brain, for some reason, in our brain, if it hears the same phrases or sentences, it just blocks it out. Please avoid that. Please fight against that, as if you're hearing it for the first time. There's a value in the repeatability. Many countless arahants became arahants because of the repeatability. That's why I don't like the way translations are often done, where there's just the ellipses. So please listen, re-listen, read it again, even though it's the same chunk of data sometimes. But there's the 6 senses that we're going to cover. So this is the second one. Also, because when you do not discern by knowing fully, as you look carefully to see what this thing called an ear factually is, or the sounds it hears, or ear consciousness, or ear contact, and whatever kind of feelings that may arise from it, be it pleasant, painful, or neutral, which result from the contact being made by the ear, then you become triggered and provoked by the ear. The sounds it hears, the ear consciousness or ear contact, and whatever kind of feelings that may arise from it, be it pleasant, painful, or neutral, which result from the contact being made by the ear. So basically, you identify yourself here as the subject, and then, so let's call that A, and then you're calling that the object. Let's call that B. So now there's an person, there's you, and there's the thing that you're hearing. The person from whom the sound is reaching you. The sound that is bothersome. There's a me, there's an I, there's a you, basically. So this is already, you're stuck. You grabbed the bait. You grabbed the bait. Because you're not seeing the whole process. That's why Lord Buddha is going through the process. There's the eye, there's the object, there's the ear, there's the object, and then there is the consciousness of these two. It's not a third thing. It's not a thing. It's not a thing. It is the result of the ear and the sound coming together. But consciousness itself, or the awareness of the sound, is not a thing in itself. So it cannot even be called a third item. But because of the consciousness being there, suddenly you're able to pick up contact. You're able to pick up data. You can even have a response to the stimulus that you can receive thanks to the consciousness. But how did this consciousness come about? Simply because you had a functioning ear and you had an actual audible sound. But how many of us actually pausing to consider all this? So it's far easier for me to just point the finger and say, stop making that noise over there. Because I already identified with it now. I'm hooked. I bought the lie of the magician. Now, when you allow yourself to live in such a deluded manner where you are triggered and provoked by becoming identified with and thus tied down to these feelings, you will experience tension and tightness, feeling like you are trapped with uncertainty, as you intend to run away from the experience to a much better and more satisfying one. When I was in Asia a few years ago, somebody was asking a question after I gave a Dhamma talk and said, you know what, you Buddhists, he happened to be, I think he identified as a Christian. So he said, but you Buddhists, you talk about suffering, but I'm not suffering, he said. So I asked him a few questions. It ended up like he had a few children, grown-ups, that were studying overseas. And I said, if something happened to either one of them, what happens to you? Well, nothing's gonna, I said, what if? So I brought the person to check their body in response to what I just hypothetically tried to give him a scenario of, like, what if something happened to them? So what I'm trying to drive at here is, what is your body experiencing? What are you experiencing? Because sometimes we're so lost in our thoughts, we forget the body. That's why when I teach meditation or guide in meditation students, I try to bring the person's attention back to the body, because the body will not lie. It's authentic, far more authentic than the intellect, because it's much more connected with the emotions. So that's why we see here the words tightness and tension and agitation being used. Because oftentimes we can convince ourselves that we are really practicing. We're seeing the feelings, but we're just doing it intellectually, conceptually. And we think that we figured it out until something happens and someone says something and we just blow up. What happened? Oh, that was ongoing. The tightness was always there. I just didn't pay attention to it. To what? To the body. So it's very important to check with your body to understand the feelings. That is where the dukkha has been happening. That's why ignorance equals dukkha. You're ignorant of the feeling of tension and tightness in your body to begin with. Tension and tightness are not ideas. They're very much living experience that manifest in the body, but somebody has to be aware of it. An ignorant mind is not going to be. A present mind will be, however. So that's why Lord Buddha has to use so many examples and so many words and so many suttas to drive the point across. And he continues, then what occurs is this: the wanting in you to grab on to the five aggregates intensifies and builds up, leading to this cycle of agitation, repeating itself again in the future. As a result of this, the craving in you also grows, which is closely tied to yearning and lusting to be reborn sometime here and sometime there in the future. Remember the satisfaction seeking? That's the thing which is driving you. The promise that the next one, then so you're completely ignoring what happened to the previous one. It arose. What happened to all that excitement? It died. It died. So now you're connecting, you're lynching yourself, you're hooking yourself to the next one, the promise of the next one, but you're ignoring the danger that this presents. The danger that the wise person sees, and that's why they step out of that whole game. Because they want to end sorrow. We practice this Dhamma and discipline of the Lord Buddha Tathagata in this dispensation, not to accumulate things, but to get rid of the unending sorrow, or the unending dukkha. We want to end it. That's why we practice. That's it. We see the suffering and we want to end it. That's why we come to the Dhamma. That is it. That's why we practice. That's why we study it. So, also because when you do not discern by knowing fully, as you look carefully to see what this thing called a nose factually is, or the odors it smells, or nose consciousness, or nose contact, and whatever kind of feelings that may arise from it, be it pleasant, painful, or neutral, which result from the contact being made by the nose, then you become triggered and provoked by the nose. The odors it smells, the nose consciousness or nose contact, and whatever kind of feelings that may arise from it, be it pleasant, painful, or neutral, which result from the contact being made by the nose. Now, when you allow yourself to live in such a deluded manner, where you are triggered and provoked by becoming identified with and thus tied down to these feelings, you will experience tension and tightness, feeling like you are trapped with uncertainty as you intend to run away from that experience. to a much better and more satisfying one. You see the third one again, the seeking of satisfaction, the promise of it. So, feeling like you are trapped with uncertainty as you intend to run away. Then what occurs is this: the wanting in you to grab onto the five aggregates. This is another word for a pancha upadana khanda, the clinging, the grabbing aggregates. You want to keep this intact. This is another way of naming it atta. Atta, the false belief in a substantial self. That's another word. That's why Lord Buddha gave the third characteristic of existence, which we call anatta. So anicca, the impermanence, dukkha, I mentioned these two already. And then now you have the anatta. So when we are in the cycle of suffering, we have intense disbelief. We don't subscribe to the teaching, the instruction that Lord Buddha has given. Instead, we want to continue trying to capture our tail, like that dog. So what then occurs is this: the wanting in you to grab onto the five aggregates intensifies and builds up, leading to this cycle of agitation, repeated again and again and again in the future. So here too, we see how you have the nose, you have the odors, and because of these two, you have nose consciousness. Again, it's not a third thing. It just happens when you got these two together. Think of it as fuel, gasoline, and then you have the source of the fire, the spark, right? So you put these two together, suddenly you have a big explosion or a fire, a big fire. So the mind comes in and says, well, the fire is a third thing. And usually we completely forget about the spark and the gasoline that started it. So those two things are the nuts and bolts of the living experience, especially when we're using the word feeling, which is further down the road after consciousness, right? So nose consciousness, then it has to turn into contact. It needs to contact something. You need to become aware of it. That's why vijnana, oftentimes I like to use the term, instead of the English word consciousness, I like to use the word awareness, sense awareness. To me, it's much more, practical. It's relatable than consciousness. So, as a result of this, the craving in you also grows, which is closely tied to yearning and lusting to be reborn sometime here and sometime there in the future. Running after the next satisfying thing. Meanwhile, your physical and mental difficulties, frustrations, along with the constant anxiety and unending sorrow also increase, as they all come to add more heated agitation into every aspect of your life, thereby making you experience further bodily, emotional, and mental suffering. You probably have heard me mention how it's crucial. People talk about nirvana or nibbana, they want to experience release or freedom from suffering, but they never give enough attention to the suffering part. Meaning they're not present to the suffering. They're not acknowledging suffering properly. They're not mindful of the suffering. Instead, we think that it happened at one point in the past, and that's it. We forget about it. And we want to eliminate. Meanwhile, suffering is taking place all the time. All the time, that is, when there is a neglect of all that is taking place that Lord Buddha is talking about. That we're not aware that they are taking place. Because we're not even connected to the body. We're not even aware that there is this agitation in me that's coming up turning into frustration that's coming out of the uncertainty, because I know deep down that this thing that I'm pursuing now, based on the promise of a satisfaction, which I'm pursuing nevertheless, I know that it's going to be a disappointment. Every one of us knows this. Then it's just a gradation of how much are we willing to divulge that to ourselves, to be honest. So honesty is what I'm trying to talk about here. Can I be honest with the suffering I am experiencing? But you cannot be honest without mindfulness, without sati. I have to see those moments of disappointment, which is another word for dukkha, by the way, when they're occurring to me by my choices during the day, throughout my day, throughout my life. This means that the person is now slowly stepping out from buying that whole story of the magician, buying that whole story that don't worry, the next one is going to be superb. It's going to be the perfect. It's going to hit the spot just right. You're never going to want again. Or when was the last time that happened? Including actually Nibbana could turn into that in many people's minds, where they're lusting and yearning for Nibbana without understanding as to why. If you don't appreciate suffering, if you don't understand suffering and the pain that it causes you, not having the wisdom to see, meaning to have the ignorance to avoid and be continuously deluded, it deprives you from understanding as to why is it that I must attain Nibbana. So it's not just a goal. It's an ending of pain. You're cutting that cord to further more and more pain and sorrow and suffering and lamentation. As a result of this, the craving in you also grows, which is closely tied to yearning and lusting, to be reborn here, sometime there. Meanwhile, your physical and mental difficulties, frustrations, along with the constant anxiety and unending sorrow also increase, as they all come to add more heated agitation into every aspect of your life, thereby making you experience further bodily, emotional, and mental suffering. Also, because when you do not discern by knowing fully, as you look carefully to see what this thing called a tongue factually is, or the flavors it tastes, or tongue consciousness, or tongue contact, and whatever kind of feelings that may arise from it, be it pleasant, painful, or neutral, which result from the contact being made by the tongue. Then you become triggered and provoked by the tongue, the flavors it tastes, the tongue consciousness or tongue contact, and whatever kind of feelings that may arise from it, be it pleasant, painful, or neutral, which result from the contact being made by the tongue, which, by the way, we oftentimes take as things that are concrete, unchanging. I have a cousin who is in Lebanon. A few years ago, if you recall that big explosion that happened, she was one of the victims, and she was, I might have mentioned in one of the talks previously. If I did, I apologize, but I find it pertinent to this section of the sutta, where basically my cousin lost her senses when it came to her tongue, let's say, or the nose. In her case, it was the nose, so she doesn't have the olfactory perception of differentiate, or she doesn't even smell anymore. And I know so many people who have been treated during the last 3 years or so with getting different types of medications and things. All of a sudden, as a side effect, they lost their taste buds. They cannot taste anymore. Well, what happened? I thought it was fixed. I thought it was unconditioned. I thought it was always there. I thought it was part of my personality. No, it was just conditioned. But what if I put so much credence on that previously? So it was such a big part of me and my life. And now I can't. Because I can't smell. My cousin, she can't smell because She was injured. The blast was so intense, even though she was more than a kilometer away, it, pushed her. She flew in the hospital. She was visiting her dad in the hospital, and she flew and slammed her head against the wall several meters down the hallway. She was in a coma and all that. So that completely shifted her life. She's now a different person. Okay, what kind of a different person? That's another, thing, a basket. Basically, the identification is the problem. Because that's why I want to mention that all of these are transitory. All of these are changing. But for some reason, we keep anchoring ourselves in these transitory things and saying or calling them, this is me, this is who I am. Where what if you're a sommelier, a person who has to go and taste wine, for example, and you get paid very good money by some, I guess, vineyards and things, and you lost your taste buds. Now you cannot taste, let alone identify what is it that you're tasting and call it as to where this is or what type of wine it is. What some of them, I had seen a clip one time of this sommelier, and he was able to break it down. They have contests, They have a special prestige in the world. He lost it because he lost the taste bud. So what does that do to the person and their delusion into buying this whole formula of the magician, of the feeling, when the feeling even is shaken by its roots? Now, when you allow yourself to live in such a deluded manner where you are triggered and provoked by becoming identified with and thus tied down to these feelings, you will experience tension and tightness, feeling like you are trapped with uncertainty. As you intend to run away from that experience to a much better and more satisfying one, then what occurs is this: the wanting in you to grab onto the five aggregates intensifies and builds up, leading to this cycle of agitation, repeating itself again in the future. Every time we grab onto the five aggregates, the pain intensifies. Dukkha intensifies. We start to frown even more in our meditation. You become more jittery. You become less tolerant. You become easily prone to anger. As a result of this, the craving in you also grows, Lord Buddha says, which is closely tied to yearning and lusting to be reborn. Okay. So number 5, also because when you do not discern by knowing fully, as you look carefully to see what this thing called the body factually is, or the textures it touches, or body consciousness, or body contact, and whatever kind of feelings that may arise from it, be it pleasant, painful, or neutral, which result from the contact being made by the body, then you become triggered and provoked by the body, the texture it touches, the body consciousness or body contact, and whatever kind of feelings that may arise from it, be it pleasant, painful, or neutral, which result from the contact being made by the body. So one trick that you could use is use some of those examples I gave you. Let's say in this case, it's the body. What if I lose a sense perception in the body? Throughout my life, I had several surgeries and operations. I lost count, but one that I remember is actually one was in my knee, the other one was my inguinal hernia. So my knee, when they opened it because they did the ACL surgery, anterior cruciate ligament. They had to put in a new one because mine was torn. It was a terrible experience, but anyhow, after they did the operation, because they cut that part of the skin, even though it was arthroscopic, so it was a very small hole, nevertheless, there's no sensation in those areas. Same thing with the inguinal hernia. So what if I was identified with those spots? There goes my world. So things are conditioned. So I cannot put too much credence on it to begin with, let alone really become attached to those. This is one way of looking at it as well. That's why anicca is shocking to many people. For that reason, they want to maintain this snapshot of whatever they thought or think to be the idealist part of their life, the most ideal part of their life, the snapshot of their history, perhaps. And they want to maintain that at any cost possible. They'll pay it. Plastic surgery, this, that, photoshopping their pictures, What are they trying to maintain? The delusion. As a result, the craving in you also grows, which is closely tied to yearning and lusting to be reborn sometime here and sometime there in the future. Meanwhile, your physical and mental difficulties, frustrations, along with the constant anxiety and unending sorrow also increase, as they all come to add more heated agitation into every aspect of your life, thereby making your experience further bodily, emotional, mental suffering. Also, bhikkhus, when you do not discern by knowing fully, as you look carefully to see what this thing called the mind factually is, or the mental objects it knows, or mind consciousness, or mind contact, and whatever kind of feelings that may arise from it, be it pleasant, painful, or neutral, which result from the contact being made by the mind. If you have a mind, you're aware of the mind, so basically you're not in a coma, and you have a thought, you have a memory. Because of that, you're going to have the memory. Now, what you do with it is very important. What I've noticed in my experience as well as a practitioner, but also in lives of students, is that we don't like something unpleasant presenting itself when everything is going beautifully. You're in a jhana, you're in a this, you're in a that. It's like, yeah, Bhante, why did this bad thing happen? Why did this hindrance show up? Why is there restlessness in the mind? Everything was going beautifully. I was about to become an arahant, and now I lost it, Bhante. I lost it. It's just the mind doing its thing. It's like a mosquito landing on your skin. You can't continue fighting it. Or the wind or the breeze comes, and now you're freaking out over the possibility that a mosquito that's infected can come and infect you. Now, every time the hair follicles move, you're going to be shaken up. The same thing with the mind. So these objects will come and go because the mind at this point is conditioned. It's going to be triggered. So long as you have a mind, it's going to happen. So the key thing is not to be holding on to these aggregates. Otherwise, when you allow yourself to live in such a deluded manner where you are triggered and provoked by becoming identified with and thus tied down to these feelings, you will experience tension and tightness, feeling like you are trapped with uncertainty as you intend to run away from that experience to a much better and more satisfying one. Then what occurs is this: the wanting in you to grab onto the five aggregates intensifies and builds up, leading to this cycle of agitation repeating itself again and again in the future. So the question that we need to ask is, why do we suffer? Who is the author of my suffering, basically? No, it's not the usual suspects that the world kept telling you. Yes, it's that person over there. Yes, it's that event that happened to me. That's why I suffer. The way the world is, the way that no one listens to me, the way da-da-da-da-da. Another good question to ask is, what is perpetuating my suffering? Or why is my suffering being perpetuated, continued? Why? And what is worse, physical or mental and emotional suffering? We need to ask these questions. Physical suffering can come and go. I don't know of anyone who continuously has been suffering all throughout their life physically, but majority of people are suffering mentally and emotionally. That's why the Dhamma has its curative powers. Because it tells us the cause of suffering is not getting what we want. That's why we have the Four Noble Truths. To question that. Why do I suffer? But bhikkhus, Lord Buddha says, when instead you do discern by knowing fully, as you look carefully to see what this thing called an I factually is, and the forms it sees, the I consciousness, the eye contact, and whatever kind of feelings that may arise from it, be it pleasant, painful, or neutral, which result from the contact being made by the I, then you neither become triggered nor provoked by the I, the forms it sees, or by the I consciousness or eye contact, and whatever kind of feelings that may arise from it, be it pleasant, painful, or neutral, which result from the contact being made by the eye. So, think of a mirror. Do you think the mirror gets insulted if it sees you? I don't know, or it sees something ugly that you consider ugly? No, it's a mirror. Or it becomes bedazzled by something beautiful? No, it's a mirror. Can we observe life using the eyes? Can we see things? Of course, that doesn't mean that you're a zombie, you're a vegetable, you don't see, you don't actually vegetable. I have to take that back because vegetables also have feelings. They sense, they have response to stimuli. I'm not a piece of plastic, but we don't have to give it so much of a persona. Instead of just looking at, okay, this is an eye, yes, and that's an object I'm going to see. You can have a response to it, of course. If you see a ditch, you see an abyss, you see a hole, you don't step on it. There was a different response to that situation. You know that that is dangerous, but you don't make it into a bigger deal than it is. Do you see how simple it is? That Lord Buddha has such a simple way of describing something that we've really made so complex in the life that we lead. Because the moment the mirror has a reaction to the situation, oh, I can't believe she's wearing that dress. Oh, what is she thinking? The mirror never does that. Oh, look how beautiful you are. Oh, don't go. Just wait some more. Stand in front of me some more. The mirror never says that. If the mirror doesn't say that, the mirror is not going to be suffering. This is another way of looking at it. So see the object. Yes, if you're alive and you are looking with attention, you're going to have a consciousness develop. Eye consciousness in this case. Okay. Because of that eye consciousness, there will be therefore eye contact. Okay, as the contact is occurring, there is eye feeling therefore. Okay, so far so good. It's just a feeling, Lord Buddha says. Just a feeling. At this point, we're at the stage of a mirror. Now, the moment I look at that feeling and it's painful, let's say, and I make it, ooh, I don't like that painful. There you go. You passed the point of no return. You made it part and parcel of you. Now, there's an object and a subject. Now there is a very strong relationship, which will lead you into more frustration, tension, and pain and dukkha. Now, when in this manner, so the wise person does the opposite. That was the way of the Puthujjana. Now, when in this manner you do not allow yourself to live a deluded life whereby you are not triggered, you're neither triggered nor provoked by, hence not identified with, and thus no longer tied down to these feelings, you will not experience tension or tightness, as well as any feeling of being trapped with uncertainty, nor try to run away from whatever experience that is happening to a much better and more satisfying one. Then there will not be any wanting in you to grab on to the five aggregates. You say, okay, what's wrong with this situation? Yeah, but it's unpleasant. Okay, I get it. I get it. It's painful. I fell. I hurt myself. I injured myself. I get it. It's painful. The typical modus operandi will be, let me jump to the next moment of how things used to be, at least, or how it could be better than this. Guess what? You just opened the door for frustration, difficulties, suffering, because you went away from what is truly happening now. Lord Buddha calls it diteva dhamme, right now in this very moment. The truth, the Dhamma of this very moment, you're neglecting. You're pushing it away and saying, no, I need to go to a more promising situation, experience than this one, because I don't like this. Because I cracked my head open. I don't like this. I'm in pain. I get it. Lord Buddha is not saying go and become masochistic or inflict pain upon yourself. No. Far from it. The person who's going into those cycles of repeatability, of repeating that same pain and dukkha, is the masochist. But the person who says, okay, what's happening now, that is not a puthujjana. That is a wise person who's saying, okay, hold on. Do I have a body? Yes, I do have. Yes, I have a body. Okay. And did that rock exist? Yes. Is that object there? Yes. So I live on a world and on a planet which follows certain basic physical laws. So if I jump on that rock unsupported, I'm going to injure myself. I'm going to scratch, maybe break a bone, crack my head. I see. Okay, so that's why it happened. Okay. Why did my tire blow up? Okay. Do I have a tire? Yes. Am I riding it on the road? Yes. Are there stuff on the road that can pierce through the rubber? Yes. There you go. The rubber, laws, objects, these things will happen. So, but in both of these cases, you didn't take it personally. You simply looked at it objectively, in a sense, practically, pragmatically. You observed it and said, okay. So what you did was you basically removed yourself from being tied in, pancha upadana khanda. Why did this happen to me? That's what the pancha upadana khanda do to a person. You get locked, your brain just shuts down. You freeze. You're no longer living. That's why you want to recapture better times or the promise of better times to come. Either of those things don't exist, by the way. Only this experience does. There's only truth here, diteva dhamme. And that's why Lord Buddha calls the practitioners, his practitioners, including himself, we are the happy ones. Because you don't live in the future, nor in the past. As a result of this, the craving in you, which would otherwise lead you to be reborn in the future, sometime here and sometime there, also dies due to the lack in yearning or lusting to be reborn. Meanwhile, your physical and mental difficulties, frustrations, along with any states of anxiety or sorrow also disappear as you continue to give up while the serene state of tranquil contentedness spreads into every aspect of your life, thereby making you experience further bodily, emotional, and mental bliss. See that there's a nice contrast for you. This is immediate. That's why Lord Buddha called the Dhamma Sanditthiko. The Dhamma, if it's practiced properly, without adding anything to it, without taking anything away from it, removing anything from it, it gives you immediate result. The immediate result of you not experience pain is you experience physical, emotional, mental bliss. Different levels of it, of course, depending on how much you've relinquished. Remember the Nissarana, the fifth aspect of how to look at feelings? Instead of just being fixated on the satisfaction or the arising of the pleasurable feeling, you just looked at the whole scene, the movie, and said, no, I don't want to have any part of it. I don't want to deal with it. I'm just pulling away from this whole lie, deception. In this way, whatever your views might have been in the past, they now become right view, Lord Buddha says. Whatever your intentions might have been, they now become right intentions. So, samma ditti, samma sankappa. And however your speech might have been, it now becomes right speech. However your effort had been, it now becomes right effort. And however your mindfulness had been, it now becomes right mindfulness. Whatever your collectedness of mind had been, it now becomes right collectedness of mind. And whatever your actions may have been in the past, they now become right actions, getting purified on account of your newly chosen intentional bodily and verbal actions, making you live with right livelihood. In this way, the Noble Eightfold Path comes to its development in you and gets completed. You are now set. You are now really living the Dhamma. This is what's called Majjhima Pada, the middle path. This is the middle path. Not a little bit of this, a little bit of that. No, when you are living according to the Noble Eightfold Path, you are living the middle path. And when you develop the Noble Eightfold Path, as a result, the four establishments of mindfulness also come to full development and get completed, the Satipatthana. Similarly, the four right efforts, the four bases of spiritual powers, the five spiritual faculties, the five spiritual powers, and the seven awakening factors all get to be completed as well through development. These are the 37 aids to awakening, Bodhipakkhya. Meanwhile, both calm and insight continue growing and developing together steadily. That's samatha and vipassana are working together in you. And whatever should be known accurately through deep understanding and higher knowledge, those you come to know accurately through your deep understanding and higher knowledge. That's another way of calling abhinya. Whatever states should be abandoned by intentionally relinquishing them through deep understanding and higher knowledge, all those you come to abandon by intentionally relinquishing them through your deep understanding and higher knowledge. Whatever states should be developed through deep understanding and higher knowledge, those you come to develop through your deep understanding and higher knowledge. Whatever states that should be realized through deep understanding and higher knowledge, all those you come to realize through your deep understanding and higher knowledge. Whose knowledge? Whose understanding? Yours. This path is for those who want to experience it for themselves. And everyone has to be, who's desiring that, which is a noble desire, it's Dhammachanda in a sense, they need to do the work. And when asked, bhikkhus, as to what are those things that should be accurately known through deep understanding and higher knowledge, then you must reply by saying that they are, in fact, the five grabbing aggregates. Remember earlier I was mentioning the Pancha Upadana Khanda, the five aggregates? Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, Vinyana. Right? Material form, feelings or sensations, perceptions or memories, sankharas or habitual drives or tendencies, and consciousness, or what I was referring to earlier, awareness, sense awareness. When you grab onto these, that's pancha. Pancha means five. Upadana means clinging, grabbing. Kanda. This is how you're living your life. How are you going to live with happiness? How is dukkha going to be relinquished if you're living like this? In other words, the grabbing and latching on to the form aggregate, rupa, kanda, the grabbing and latching onto the feeling aggregate, the grabbing and latching onto the perception aggregate, the grabbing and latching onto the habitual tendencies aggregate, sankharas, and the grabbing and latching onto the sense awareness or consciousness aggregate. Therefore, bhikkhus, these are the things that should be accurately known through deep understanding and higher knowledge. So these are not like revelations that you're sitting there in some jhana, all of a sudden they show up and you're good to go. No. Sorry, it doesn't work like that. You need to understand. These are not lights and things that, spark around and okay, you're good to go. Okay, done. Next, no. The Dhamma manifests in your personal life, in your behavior, in your interactions, how you work with these experiences, which we started talking about today, emotions as emotions. That's where it manifests. Otherwise, it's just suppression, because everything is going nice and lovely and dandy until something happens and then it blows up. When you have understanding, deep understanding, it doesn't blow up because you see it. You understand the pain, you understand the causes of the frustration. And what, bhikkhus, are those states that should be abandoned by intentionally relinquishing them through deep understanding and higher knowledge? Minimizing the importance for re-becoming due to ignorance, as well as the craving for re-becoming, are the states that should be abandoned by intentionally relinquishing them through deep understanding and higher knowledge. Minimizing the importance for re-becoming. So you're looking at, you're taking away, you're pulling the rug from under that tendency. Basically, you are more interested in the nisarana section, the stepping out that I was saying, of looking at the feeling, instead of being fed that bait of, let's go to the next one, next experience, that seeking of gratification. You're not buying that. In Pali, the term is pono bhavika, the desire to re-become again. So you're not buying into that. You're pulling away. Further, bhikkhus, what are those states that should be developed through deep understanding and higher knowledge? Mental quietude and penetrative insight should be developed through deep understanding and higher knowledge. Mental quietude is samatha. Penetrative insight is vipassana. And what states, bhikkhus, should be realized through deep understanding and higher knowledge? Full comprehension and full release should be realized through deep understanding and higher knowledge. So there was the realization, there's the development, there's the abandoning, and there is the understanding. So similarly, bhikkhus, when you do discern by knowing fully, as you look carefully to see what this thing called an ear, so that was the eye. So now the same formula plays with the other senses. So this portion I might go ahead and briefly, summarize, because this would be the repetition portion. But I highly recommend and ask that you go ahead and read the sutta as often as necessary to really take it in. And I have, I believe I have this also narrated, recorded on the suttas in the Majjhima Nikāya section. Maybe not this translation. This is a recent one that I did than the other one. So anyhow, similarly, bhikkhus, when you do discern by knowing fully, as you look carefully to see what this thing called an ear factually is and the sounds it hears, the ear consciousness, the ear contact, and whatever kind of feelings that may arise from it, be it pleasant, painful, or neutral, which result from the contact being made by the ear, then you neither become triggered nor provoked by the ear. The sounds it hears, the ear consciousness or ear contact, and whatever kind of feelings that may arise from it, be it pleasant, painful, or neutral, which result from the contact being made by the ear. If you're being annoyed or angered by something you're hearing, let's say a sound, let's say you're hearing from a radio or a computer, turn it off. Turn it off and see what happens. Years ago, I used to watch, when I had a TV, I was a layman, and when I used to watch TV in those days, I used to play this game with myself when it came to commercials and even shows. And I would intentionally turn on these sitcoms and things, and I would hear these people, the audience laughing, this and that. I would just mute it. I would stop laughing. What was that? Why is that? Or the music of movies. You can turn off the soundtrack. All of a sudden, the action that the viewer is seeing, it becomes far less impactful, less engaging. Same thing with commercials. What's happening there? The jig is up. You're turning on the lights in the movie theater. You're not going to be sold that story anymore. You're not going to be invested. You're seeing things better and better as they really are. No longer being deceived by the six senses. As a result of this, the craving in you, which would otherwise lead you to be reborn in the future, sometime here and sometime there, also dies due to the lack in yearning and lusting to be reborn. And I'm going to go to the other senses now to complete the sutta in time today and save my voice. Similarly, because when you do discern by knowing fully, as you look carefully to see what this thing called a nose factually is, and the odors it smells, the nose consciousness, the nose contact, and whatever kind of feelings that may arise from it, be it pleasant, painful, or neutral, which result from the contact being made by the nose, then you neither become triggered nor provoked by the nose. The odors it smells, the nose consciousness or nose contact, and whatever kind of feelings that may arise from it, be it pleasant, painful, or neutral, which result from the contact being made by the nose. Similarly, because when you do discern by knowing fully, as you look carefully to see what this thing called the tongue factually is, and the flavors it tastes, the tongue consciousness, the tongue contact, and whatever kind of feelings that may arise from it, be it pleasant, painful, or neutral, which result from the contact being made by the tongue, then you neither become triggered nor provoked by the tongue, because you're breaking it into pieces. You're no longer seeing it as a one string of unbroken chains. No. It is actually made up of things. It's like a strip of film, movie, 24 frames a second. There's not a movie as such. It's just picture frames, one after the other, but each frame is slightly moving the character in a certain way. And when you play it fast enough, there's a so-called movie, but it's not moving. Be it pleasant, painful, or neutral, which result from the contact being made by the tongue. Next. Similarly, because when you do discern by knowing fully, as you look carefully to see what this thing called the body factually is, and the textures it touches, the body consciousness, the body contact, and whatever kind of feelings that may arise from it, be it pleasant, painful, or neutral, which result from the contact being made by the body, then you neither become triggered nor provoked by the body. The textures it touches, the body consciousness or body contact, and whatever kind of feelings that may arise from it, be it pleasant, painful, or neutral, which result from the contact being made by the body. And finally, bhikkhus, when you do discern by knowing fully, as you look carefully to see what this thing called a mind factually is, and the mental objects it knows, the dhammas I mentioned, the mind consciousness, the mind contact, and whatever kind of feelings that may arise from it, be it pleasant, painful, or neutral, which result from the contact is phassa, by the way, being made by the mind, then you neither become triggered nor provoked by the mind. The mental objects it knows, the mind consciousness or mind contact, and whatever kind of feelings that may arise from it, be it pleasant, painful, or neutral, which result from the contact being made by the mind. Now, when in this manner you do not allow yourself to live a deluded life, whereby you are neither triggered nor provoked by them, hence not identified with and thus no longer tied down to these feelings, you will not experience tension or tightness, as well as any feeling of being trapped with uncertainty, nor try to run away from whatever experience is happening to a much better and more satisfying one. Then there will not be any wanting in you to grab onto the five aggregates. This is another reason why there is rebirth, by the way, because at the moment of death, think of it as the macrocosm, the macro level of these. So your life becomes a training for that moment of death. In a typical experience of something unpleasant, a feeling of unpleasantness, essentially that's what you're doing. When the person is wanting to jump to the next more pleasurable, satisfying, promising of that gratification type of a feeling, when you superimpose that to the moment of death, what that turns into is pancha upadana, to the point where the person wants to grab onto a new set of khandhas in the form of another body. The craving for another body, another experience. So instead of waiting for that moment to come for you to do the practice or to really test it out, you have a whole lifetime ahead of you, however long that is. Appreciating these moments and to test drive it now and to become skilled and strengthen those quote unquote muscles of panya, to be ready when that moment comes, to not want to jump to the next life. Instead of sitting there with the feeling of whatever type of feelings that are occurring, nor try to run away from whatever experience is happening to a much better and more satisfying one, then there will not be any wanting in you to grab onto the five aggregates, thus bringing about the dispersal process of the five aggregates, which will gradually come apart, leading to the ending of the cycle of agitation from repeating itself again in the future. As a result of this, the craving in you, which would otherwise lead you to be reborn in the future, sometime here and sometime there, also dies, due to the lack in yearning or lusting to be reborn. Meanwhile, your physical and mental difficulties, frustrations, along with any states of anxiety or sorrow, also disappear as you continue to give up, while the serene state of tranquil contentedness spreads into every aspect of your life, thereby making you experience further bodily, emotional, and mental bliss. In this way, whatever your views might have been in the past, they now become right view. Whatever your intentions might have been, they now become right intentions. And however your speech might have been, it now becomes right speech. However your effort had been, it now becomes right effort. And however your mindfulness had been, it now becomes right mindfulness. Whatever your collectedness of mind had been, it now becomes right collectedness of mind, samma samadhi. And whatever your actions may have been in the past, they now become right actions, getting purified on account of your newly chosen intentional bodily and verbal actions, making you live with right livelihood. In this way, the Noble Eightfold Path comes to its full development in you and gets completed. And when you develop the Noble Eightfold Path, as a result, the 4 establishments of mindfulness also come to full development and get completed. Similarly, the 4 right efforts, the 4 bases of spiritual powers, the 5 spiritual faculties, the 5 spiritual powers, and the 7 awakening factors all get to be completed as well through development. Meanwhile, both calm and insight continue growing and developing together steadily. And whatever should be known accurately through deep understanding and higher knowledge, those you come to know accurately through your deep understanding and higher knowledge. Whatever states should be abandoned by intentionally relinquishing them through deep understanding and higher knowledge, all those you come to abandon by intentionally relinquishing them through your deep understanding and higher knowledge. There's a reason why I wanted to put that word, that qualifier, intentionally. This path has everything to do with intention. Cetana. You're establishing wholesome kamma. Kamma has everything to do. Kamma is cetana, that intentionality in deliberately living your life. Whatever states should be developed through deep understanding and higher knowledge, those you come to develop through your deep understanding and higher knowledge. Whatever states that should be realized through deep understanding and higher knowledge, all those you come to realize through your deep understanding and higher knowledge. And when asked, bhikkhus, as to what are those things that should be accurately known through deep understanding and higher knowledge, then you must reply by saying that they are, in fact, the 5 grabbing aggregates, which basically have to be understood. In other words, the grabbing and latching on to the form aggregate, the grabbing and latching on to the feeling aggregate, the grabbing and latching onto the perception aggregate, the grabbing and latching onto the habitual drives aggregate, and the grabbing and latching onto the sense awareness or consciousness aggregate. Therefore, bhikkhus, these are the things that should be accurately known through deep understanding and higher knowledge. And what, bhikkhus, are those states that should be abandoned by intentionally relinquishing them through deep understanding and higher knowledge? Minimizing the importance for rebecoming due to ignorance, as well as the craving for rebecoming, are the states that should be abandoned by intentionally, relinquishing them through deep understanding and higher knowledge. Further, bhikkhus, what are those states that should be developed through deep understanding and higher knowledge? Mental quietude and penetrative insight, samatha and vipassana, again, should be developed through deep understanding and higher knowledge. And what states, bhikkhus, should be realized through deep understanding and higher knowledge? Full comprehension and release should be realized through deep understanding and higher knowledge. This is what the Blessed One said, and those bhikkhus carefully listening to him were delighted in hearing the Blessed One's words. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. A deep, powerful sutta, which there's no way that one time going through it is going to do it justice, of course. It's one of those suttas that really, I don't know of any sutta that you just read or listen to once, by the way. Having said that, this happens to be one of the top, I have to say, that we have to go and listen to again, or read it again, and that's why the PDF is available on the website. I highly recommend doing that, because it's very similar to you holding on to the practice of proper sila, virtuous living. You are the one, no one's there. You are the one yourself. When that moment comes, the opportunities are there where you could take the path more traveled, shall we say, where the unwholesome could be done by you because the opportunities are there. No one's looking. No one knows except for you. Or you deliberately and intentionally saying, no, I'm going to take this path, the path least traveled, because it's the right thing. That intentionally living your life, making that choice to deliberately make kamma, is the same principle being applied here. When it comes to looking at the feelings with a little bit more scrutiny, you can even make charts, because I'm terrible when it comes to concepts like this. I have to write them down. I have to see it visually. So over time, I would always make these tiny little drawings, diagrams, and I would connect images of, okay, what is the feeling? Okay, feeling. Okay, before that, what is that? Contact. Okay, passa. What is before that? Salaya. Okay, 6 senses. Each one of us works differently. So I highly recommend you put the effort, put the mileage in, and put the effort. This is your life, and make every day a training for that moment that is waiting for every single one of us, which is the moment of death. May that moment be lived fully, truthfully, with 100% awareness and 100% sati and sampajanya, with panya, with wisdom. And these are the tools that Lord Buddha left us with. I mean, how rich are we? It's incredible, the resources we have to train. So we can never get to that moment, at least those of us who have come across the Dhamma in this life, to say, well, I didn't have the right tools. No, we have. There you go. Here's a wonderful tool. What is our excuse? There shouldn't be any. If you just take this sutta and keep this sutta practicing according to what Lord Buddha is saying, it will enhance your life. It will give you those abhinyas, those true, deep understanding and realization that is necessary to attain Nibbana. So I will stop here and see if there are any questions.
Bhante, thank you for your talk.
Yes.
There's a passage that's repeated several times throughout the sutta. Further bhikkhus, what are those states that should be developed through deep understanding and higher knowledge? Mental quietude and penetrative insight should be developed. Now, as I was reading that, it reminded me of a situation. I was listening to a talk by another monk who had the ability that he could refer to sutta references very well. And someone asked him about that because he hadn't been a monk for a very long time. And they said, how are you able to remember all of those sutta references at the required time? And his answer was that as his mind becomes more developed, it's increasing his intuition. He doesn't have to think in a logical process. He pretty much lets go and the answer comes to him. So, which made a big impression on me as well. As I hear this developing mental quietude and penetrative insight, I thought, well, maybe that penetrative insight is the intuition that he was referring to, and then you described it as mental quietude as some samatha and penetrative insight as vipassana. So what are your thoughts on using the word intuition in this area of penetrative insight and vipassana? Could you regard that as intuition?
Absolutely. Because you cannot have realization of the Dhamma without the presence of intuition. That is my experience. It's impossible. Because that's why I keep going back to mentioning in more ways than one how this is not an intellectual affair. You need the intellect, of course, to understand, to refer this, that. But ultimately, you need to really allow. The same thing with meditation. Same thing. There's a lot of allowing that needs to be present. So we have to use these terminology, even intuition. It's the closest thing to the experience of that. Some people might use a different word. So in that sense, I don't know about the monk that you mentioned of his personal experiences, but from what you share, I agree that the more you allow, you need to get out of your own way. An example that I can think of is when I would study for my, in high school, I used to study for my, let's say, the geometry class, the exams, the final exams. And I was terrible when it came to math. I would memorize algebra, the same thing. I mean, I would get good grades on the tests and things, but the final exams were the big deal, obviously, because they would impact your GPA tremendously. So I knew how much was writing on it. So I had to memorize the formulas. So the teacher would bring it, and then there would be a huge area, like a study library area, and each of us would be sitting on a separate table. And it's very ominous, I think many of us, or if not all of us, have gone through something similar. And he would come and place it face down, and don't you dare touch the paper. So it would be a stack of papers, and it would be face down. And the moment I would flip it, I would read the first question, the problem. Everything that I had studied, out the building. And I would say, okay, don't panic, read the second one. Same thing, third one, fourth. Now, these were not questions that I was not supposed to know. These were things that I knew. But it was my panicking, my fear, and my worry, my intellect, because part of the brain was saying, what are the odds that you're going to fail? What are the odds? I mean, you studied for several weeks and for the whole year, but you're not in the mind of your teacher. You don't know what he's thinking. He's going to try to do some screwy things and mess you up. And so what I figured, so I would sit there panicking, sweating, sometimes crying, and I'm seeing my classmates everyone's working, and they're getting it. I'm not. So I might as well give the paper with a big fat 0 waiting for me. And I would one time I did that, took the paper to the teacher, and he said, no, I know you can do this. Go, sit down, stop being stupid. I was like, okay, he trusts me more than I trust myself. Yeah, I did study. Okay, hold on, breathe. And I relaxed myself. And suddenly, so this could also be seeing the working of the intuition, because at the end of that ordeal, I would get the A+. One time I even got 100, over 100, which was like, I knew I'd said, but go ahead and ask me later on for those calculations or the formulas. I would not know. I would immediately forget them because I had not absorbed them intuitively. And then you read about somebody like a famous mathematician or a Nikola Tesla or someone like that, and they would see all these formulas. They would see it in the world. They would see it like Newton. He's seeing all these rules, these laws of nature in front of them. So I don't know, maybe in the case of the monk, maybe he had been a bhikkhu in the past with suttas. So he's simply walking or removing himself from being an obstacle, meaning using his intellect by saying, how do I know this? I've been only a bhikkhu recently. I don't know anything about the suttas. Why? It doesn't make logical sense. Versus the intuition that comes in and says, hold on, let's just allow. No one teaches us how to love. But then you see something that induces that in you, suddenly you're falling in love with someone. How did that happen? There's no course anywhere that I know of in school, junior high, high school, or college that teaches us how to fall in love with anyone. But we know it when it happens, or to appreciate the sunset. So again, so many different words, but basically, the way I understand and have been understanding more and more as I go through the suttas and the translation, the work that I've been doing, it has everything to do with intuition. So please don't make the mistake that some teachers still, unfortunately, are pushing for, where it's like forcing with vipassana. That's not vipassana that Lord Buddha taught. They shouldn't even be calling it vipassana. They should be calling it torture chamber. Okay? Because Lord Buddha did that. He had a PhD in torture, self-torture. But he realized that's not the way. He sat under the Bodhi tree and he said, okay, now I got myself here. I made the resolution. Okay, but what technique am I going to use? No one talks about this, you know? There's a small mention of it, however, that he recalled that time when he was a child and he just sat and he's like, oh, that was a blissful moment. I remember that. Remember, we're talking about someone who's experienced the 8 jhanas fully. That means he had deep powers, psychic powers, this and that, but they were not adequate. They were not satisfying. They were not taking him even this close, getting him this close to Panya. It wasn't. However, that memory was so alive, was so real, was so juicy, was so much Dhamma there when he was a child and he dropped into the jhana. He was like, whoa, what did I do to? And immediately his heart reminded him of it. And that intuition was the one that took him straight to Buddhahood. But what he practiced there and throughout was vipassana. But he could not do that intellectually, merely. He knew the links before he became an arahant, of course, but he didn't understand the nuances of it. And that's why when you read the life stories of famous musicians, even actors, or especially mathematicians, when they're struggling and dabbling with these difficult, enormously difficult problems, afterwards they say, you know what, I can't. And they go and they're showering, they're in the bathroom, or they're playing violin, completely doing something different than being at the blackboard. And suddenly just poof. That's a moment of allowing, the way I see it, which is necessary. It's like if you love someone and you're sitting across from them and you're feeling all these things, but your left brain comes in or your intellect comes in and you say it this way, don't say it this way, you blew it. You need to allow yourself. Same thing with any skill, like a sports or anything. I remember when I was 12 and my brother was I was doing, I mentioned so many times that when I was a jewelry apprentice, and my brother was helping me because he had been a jeweler, and he was showing me how to solder. So using a flame, and I had to pump this thing with the like a bellows, and then it had a container which had the gasoline. So there were tubes, so child labor, right? So I was pumping that, and I had to use, instead of something like tweezers, while I'm holding this ring, golden ring, and I had to solder it in a certain way without too much heat or too less, because if it was too less, the fire would go out. But if it was too strong, the gold would melt. I didn't want that. So I remember my brother still, this was 41 years ago. He said, don't be afraid, trust. I'm like, easy for you to say. I'm holding the flame here. I don't know how to work this. This is left brain and right brain working together. It's just too much. And then something happened where I just said, you know what? What's the worst thing that can happen? Let me trust. So you're sitting there on the cushion. What's the worst thing that's going to happen? You're not going to kill anyone. You're not going to steal from anyone. You're going to release yourself from suffering. Allow. What's the worst thing? I'm going to die. I'm going to die anyhow. I don't know when, but I might as well die with the Dhamma in my heart. And the only way I could do that is by throwing all the junk in my head out and give the Dhamma the beauty and integrity that it deserves by me being present to it and for it, just like you can be present to and for your loved one, completely open. And that's when love happens, because love is also all about intuition, the way I have understood it. But I don't know. What do you think? How is this landing?
You answered my question. Thank you.
Any other thoughts, questions? Okay, let us transfer some merits. Akasatha chabumata devana gamahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakhantu loka sasanam. Akasatha chabumata devana gamahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakhantu desanam. Akasatha chabumata devana gamahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakhantu mam paranti. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May you all be well. May your loved ones as well be well and happy. May there be peace. May there be less and less and less tension and tightness, starting from your body and on. And may the Triple Gems blessings be upon all of us and this world. May the world be protected from all the negative energies, from ignorance and everything else that goes along with it. And may the Dhamma be welcome into people's hearts and minds. Until next week. Sukhi Hotu.